Hi and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. Now, I gotta say, this video is somewhat ridiculous. So it is ridiculously long. It has a ridiculous number of examples, and each card takes a ridiculous amount of time. However, if you enjoy hand making things, if you like to keep your hands busy when you're on the go, or if maybe you grew up doing cross-stitching, these cards will probably be fun for you. So I know this video isn't for everyone, that's okay. Feel free to skip on if you want to, but many people requested this. This is my hobby. I do this stitching on the go and then I turn them on into cards. Many people asked that I share how to do this, so that's why I'm sharing it here today. So I'm going to cover pretty much the basics of stitching on cards. They give beautiful results and they're really fun to do. So let's first cover the tools, then we'll cover the basics and a bunch of examples. Okay, for the tools, I thought it would be best to start with the type of thread that I like. I use the DMC Pearl Cotton size 5. This is what I find easiest to use. I like how thick it is. I like that it doesn't separate, comes in a bunch of colors. Now there is a size 3, it's a little fluffier, that would work also, but I prefer the size 5. I buy mine at an embroidery shop. You can also get it at many craft stores. And if you want to, there are some Etsy sellers who sell lots of beautiful color combinations. And I'll link to the person that I like to buy from. Now I do take those colors of string and I put them onto these little floss bobbins. It takes 2 bobbins for each color and I write the number right on the top. And I find this helps me from getting it tangled up. It's also a great way to store it. Now there is another type of thread that you can use, or floss. This is the DMC 6-strand floss. This separates easy, so you can make it either thicker or thinner, and this is what many of us use for cross-stitching over the years. So you can use this if you have some from your cross-stitch collection. Here's a comparison. The 6-strand is on the top. The size 5 that I use in this video is on the bottom. I just find that the size 5 is easier because it doesn't separate. But I do like to have that 6-strand so I can use thin strands for adding beads. Okay, so this is how I store my floss. I have a ton of it because I do a lot of this. So I have a few containers for a few different colors, but likely you only need one of these containers. They're inexpensive and you can put all of your floss in there and easily organize it. I often get asked what type of needle to use for the stitching. It really is a personal preference, but I find that I reach for the size 20 embroidery needles the most. However, you can get like a variety of sizes so that you can have smaller needles so that you can do little beads if you want to. But I tend to use a size 20 and I use that for all of my stitching and for adding sequins. So you can see a few different variety packs here. So just check your local craft store or maybe your stash that you already have of needles. It's likely you have something that would work. Okay, so now for the most important tool, and that is the die that creates the cross-stitch dots or the little holes for doing the stitching. Now, if you don't have this die, I'm going to show you at the end of this video how you can do your stitching without it, so stay tuned for that. But this die is very helpful and I have used mine an awful lot. But there's a little catch. So see, I am on vacation right now editing this so that I can put it up on my blog, and I realized that the footage that shows this die was corrupt. So I had to reshoot it on vacation. This shows you how devoted I am. I had my brother hold the camera up against a hood in the kitchen, and I shot down on the kitchen counter in our vacation house. So please excuse that the lighting is bad and the filming isn't great, but I really wanted to be able to share this video. So anyways, here is the die that I use for all of this cross-stitching. It is this Paper Smooches cross-stitch die. Now this die is my best friend. You can see there's some paper in there left over from the last time I used this. That's okay, it doesn't matter at all. I just use this with my die cut machine and cardstock. You could die cut felt, but I really like to do the stitching on cardstock. So I have some white cardstock here. I do have a metal shim underneath my cutting plate just to help it cut completely through. If you don't have that, you can use some cardstock shims instead. And I like to run it through one direction and then run it through again the other direction so I can be sure it cuts through. Now you see those little gray dots? That's just the cardstock that was left behind in the die. Those will rub right off and we'll have the perfect cross-stitch paper. Now, I did want to show you can use this die to cover the entire piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock if you wanted to. And I have one example of that in this video. First, you run it through on one end. Then you take the die and kind of line it up with a few rows of holes right in the middle. It just kind of pops in there, and run it through on the bottom half too. That way you can end up with an entire card front covered with this paper that has the stitching holes. However, I find I mostly use just the smaller area of stitching that the die does. Now, there is also the Paper Smooches Dots and Dashes die that does a line of dots, and you could do kind of a border of stitching using that, and I'll show that in this video. But I find that I use that Paper Smooches cross stitch die for most of my stitching, and I can't recommend it enough. It's a perfect size, and the spacing between the holes is perfect for most of the stitches that I want to do. Okay, so another question I'm asked often is how I go about doing stitching on the go. For me, it's about staying organized and staying compact. So I have really liked using the Illustrated Faith organization bag and kangaroo pouches. Now, this bag is intended for Bible journaling, but I find that it works really well for organizing my stitching on the go. The container is beautiful, or the bag's beautiful, and it's easy to wipe off so it stays nice and clean, and there are lots of pockets. In that front pocket, I keep Lila's stitching. Here I keep some projects that I have finished. And then in the inside, I have lots of pouches for the different tools that I use. Now, this bag has been everywhere with me. It's been to baseball games, restaurants, practices, car rides, everything you can imagine. I always get compliments on it. Now, the sides do zip open since it's meant for Bible journaling. However, I really never unzip those. I just use it as a regular bag instead. Now, inside there are a few just different pockets and dividers, but I'll be honest, what I really like the most are the kangaroo pouches. You can buy more of these separately, and I think I have 3 in here. And in these kangaroo pouches, I label the different things. I have projects in one, thread in another, sequins in another. And this way I have it all organized. And then the one that says projects is whatever I'm currently working on. And that's the one that I can just grab and take individually if I want to go somewhere quickly. The kangaroo pouches alone, I think, are handy because they wipe off clean also. And I don't have to worry about anything happening to what's inside. It's very well protected. Now, I wanted to show you inside my current project pouch. In here I have whatever it is that I'm working on. This one, of course, was cut with that Paper Smooches cross-stitch die. I also have a pair of Plus Twiggy compact scissors. I really like these scissors because they have a lid, so I know that they're well protected and I don't have to worry about poking myself. I also have a large ring that I have the floss in of my current project. So I can just reach in, pull out the ring, and I have all the colors of floss that I'm using on for that project, and I can find them easily. I will link to all these products below so you can find them easily, but I do recommend going to my blog because I'll have it all lined out there. Okay, so let's talk about the basic stitches. I really don't do anything fancy and I'm not an expert at this, but there are a few stitches I seem to use quite often with doing these designs, so I thought I'd share them here. So you can see my paper there with all the holes punched or die cut. Now, you could go through and poke out each hole or use a tool to poke out all the holes, but to be honest with you, I just leave them in and I push them through as I do my stitching. It just saves me time. Okay, so when I want to do a basic half stitch, this is like a little diagonal stitch. I just start out my stitching by holding the end on the back, and then I actually am holding that little end in place by doing my stitching over it. So that's how I keep the ends tidy. You could use a piece of tape if you wanted to. So this is a half stitch. It looks like a bunch of little diagonals, and that's what I do for a lot of my stitching. Now, I, again, am not an expert on these stitches, and I'm just showing you very quickly. You can do a YouTube search on cross-stitch or embroidery stitches and learn much more. Now, if you want to do a full cross-stitch, you just go back over your half stitch and create a diagonal in the other direction, and then you'll end up with a bunch of X's. This takes me back to my early days of cross-stitching. I did it all the time as a kid, so this is something that I really enjoy doing. And of course, you can fill the entire row with these stitches. I'm just showing you a little sampling. Now, another thing that you can do with your half stitch is create like a chevron. I call it a chevron stitch. I think I'm totally making that up. But basically what you do in one row is do a half stitch in one direction. And then in the row right up against it, you do a half stitch in the other direction. And it creates little V's or the look of a chevron. And I use this stitch quite often in the stitching that I do. You can also create little lines of stitching for something very simple and clean looking. And by the way, for all of my examples today, I'm pretty much doing patterns or backgrounds. You can also just maybe stamp an image over this cross stitch paper that we've created and follow your stitching along the stamping. So you could maybe create an apple or a heart or different shapes. But I prefer to create the patterns. I just think it's fun that way. If you do want to create your own patterns, you can go over to the Paper Smooches website, and they have a download where you can print these little dot patterns so you can draw whatever you want and use that as a pattern to follow with your stitching. But again, I just love doing the patterns. Now this is a back stitch. This is one that I do often, and there are a couple ways to do it. The first is the one that I'm showing here, where I go up one hole, down the next, and then you need to back stitch and go back a hole to be able to create a complete line. Now these stitches may seem complicated or confusing, but I promise when you have paper, thread, and needle in your hand and you just give it a try, they are quite easy to do and you catch on to it very quickly. Now there is another way to do back stitch that's very simple, and this is how I have my daughter do it. I go up one hole, down the next, up the next hole, down the next, and you just do these every other stitches, which is a fun pattern in and of itself. But once you get across the whole project, you just go backwards and you go and fill in the areas between by going up and down each hole. So that's another way to do a back stitch. Again, if you want to learn more about stitches, be sure to check out some YouTube videos that some stitching experts have. They are very helpful. Now once I'm done with my stitching or I need to move on to the next color, I just tuck my needle through some of the stitches on the back of the paper and clip off the excess. I was just running out of thread there. Now that I have some more, I wanted to show you, remember those little lines that we created? I'm going back and doing back stitching around it, and that creates a box pattern. So it looks like tiny little boxes of stitching. So you can get creative in what you do with your stitching and how you combine them to create new looks. Next, I wanted to show you how to do a French knot to hold a sequin onto your project. So what I do is I bring my thread through to the front of my card. I take a sequin and I put it right onto the thread, and I push it all the way down so it's up against the paper. Now I'll zoom in here so you can see this. I take my needle and I wrap the thread around the needle one time, close down to the paper. Then I put the needle through the sequin and back down the same hole. I pull the thread tight around the needle because it's wrapped around that needle, and then I just pull the needle completely through, and I end up with a French knot that holds my sequin in place. Now I'm going to do this a few more times so you can see it in action again. So I go ahead and I put my sequin on. I take my needle and I wrap the thread around it close to the paper, tuck the needle back into the sequin through the same hole, tighten the string around the needle. That really helps quite a bit. And then I pull the needle through the other side and I'm left with a little knot. I would recommend practicing this a few times. You can also do French knots without a sequin. Here I'm wrapping the thread around the needle, going down the same hole, and there we have a French knot without a sequin, and that allows you to create little dot patterns on your project. And I'll do this a couple more times here. Now another thing you can do if you don't like doing French knots is to use a little seed bead to hold your little sequin on. So you come up through the sequin, add a seed bead, go back down through the sequin, and that will hold it in place. But I really like doing those French knots. So those are the basic stitches I use, and if you look at all of the cards that I do in this video, you can find those stitches, just used in a variety of ways. So what I recommend doing is just plain, trying whatever patterns you want. You can also go to my blog and print out the photos of the cards so that you can follow the same patterns if you wanted to. Now that we have all the stitches kind of in our arsenal and we can create all the backgrounds that we want, I wanted to show you what to do once you have your stitching done. And this is to prepare it for going onto a card. After I'm done with my stitching, I just take it and I trim the sides down so there's an even trim around the edges. And I like to use my Tim Holtz trimmer for this. I just find that it cuts easily and allows room for that thick stitching. Once I have this trimmed down, there are a few ways to add this to a card. Now, when I add this to a card, I usually like to use a foam tape around the edges just for the nice dimension. Well, the foam tape that I found is really working great for me these days is the darice, I think it's pronounced darice foam strips. These are very thin and flexible and not too thick. And I take these thin strips and I put them right up against the stitching on all four sides and add that to my card. This gives me some beautiful dimension and holds it nicely. If you don't want to use foam tape, you can then instead use any strong double-sided tape, such as Be Creative tape, and put it directly on the stitching on the back of the paper and glue that down onto your card. But here you can see when I add it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card, how it fits nicely in the center, and I have great dimension. So now we have our stitching on cards. It's time to add some embellishments or sentiments on top. So I really quickly wanted to show you how I like to adhere things on top of the stitching. I just use my Ranger multi-medium in the matte finish, and I hide it behind the letters in my sentiment or whatever embellishments I use. And that's how I hold it onto the stitching. So here I have the Ranger multi-medium in the matte finish, and I'm hiding little dots of adhesive on the back of this white heat emboss sentiment on vellum. Now I'm going to lay this onto the stitching, and it won't seem like it's going to hold there. But if you put something heavy on top of it and let it dry, it will hold, and that's all you need to do to add something on top of the stitching. Okay, so now that I have gone through pretty much all the basics for creating stitched pieces for cards, I have a bunch of examples. These all involve a bunch of different types of stitching and some fun products that I added on top. Most of them were things that I've been wanting to use for some time. So here's my first example and the first stitched piece that I ever did. This piece is covered with cross stitches, and I just kind of created a framed element where I ended up with a yellow rectangle area in the center for my sentiment. Now the sentiment on this one is from the Birch Press Make a Statement stamp set. I really like the stamp set because it has cursive sentiments, the little sentiments to go underneath it, and there are coordinating dies that cut out those cursive words. So I black heat emboss these words on vellum, then I use the coordinating die to cut them out and adhere them onto the card. Now that silver cardstock in the background, I am really liking that silver cardstock. It's from Carta and I use it on a lot of these cards. Here's one of the other first patterns that I created. This one is on black cardstock, and I used bright colored floss to create little X's covering the entire piece. This is the Simon Says Stamp Happy Days stamp set and dies that I used to create the sun. And that thank you is from that same Birch Press Make a Statement stamp set. I black heat emboss thank you on vellum, and I use the coordinating dies to cut it out. And that makes it very easy to add onto the front of the card using my liquid adhesive. I really like the look of that bright thread against the black cardstock background. And by the way, I have lots of photos of each of these cards on my blog, so be sure to go there for a closer look at all of them. Now this next card is one of my favorites. The colors on this card were actually inspired by my friend's sweater. Her name is Kathy Rakusin. I was together for the weekend with her when I did this stitching, and I copied the colors from her sweater. I encourage you to look at clothing for different color combinations and patterns. I used that same Make a Statement to white heat emboss the Hello Friend onto a die cut heart, and I added some Lucy's cards little gems to the heart. You can see the sequins that I added to the stitching, and really is fun to come up with different patterns. Now I showed you this card earlier. I actually used that silver Carta cardstock and did the stitching on that silver cardstock, and I did basic cross stitches in the background. I really like this Poppy Stamps Big Halo die. It cuts that hello very thin, and I just put clear embossing powder on that. And then it cuts the little halo or the shadow for that from vellum. And that is really a great way to make that die cut stand out on the stitching. So you'll see I use a lot of die sets that offer both the word and the shadow. I used the Winnie and Walter Sentimental Love to stamp the Sent with Love sentiment that I glued right on top of that. And I used that on a few of these cards. Now this card is different than all the others because I actually did the stitching on felt. So I used that die to cut through felt and through cardstock, and I glued them together so that the felt had some stability. And I added a bunch of half stitches to create that pattern in the background. I again used the Poppy Stamps Big Halo Hello die set, and I just did that from white cardstock and added it to the card. And again, the Scent with Love from the Winnie and Walter's Sentimental Love set. The felt really is nice and soft in real life, but I do prefer stitching on the paper. This is another one of my favorites. I really like doing the rainbow combination, and I did a variety of stitches and added some sequins along the way. These sequins are from Cat Scrapiness, and I find I really like them because they're flowers and they're cupped, so there's dimension and it catches the light quite nicely. And I'll link to those below. Now again, I used the Carta Silver Shimmer cardstock for the base. You can kind of see the shimmer there in the video, but in real life, it's nice and subtle and really gives a nice added little bit of shimmer. Now the love on this is from the Poppy Stamps Little Halo Love. Again, this cuts the thin love, which I did from white cardstock, and it creates the shadow, which is cut from vellum. And again, I used the Winnie and Walter Sentimental Love for the Scent with Love message. It's also fun to do stitching on colored cardstock. Here I did a variety of pink colored threads on a light pink cardstock. And that Congrats is from a Pink and Main die set. I've used this one in videos before. It cuts the word itself and again the shadow for it. I really like dies that have that shadow, especially for these stitched pieces, because the shadow cut from vellum kind of makes the word itself stand out more. The note card itself is cut from some silver glitter cardstock that's from My Favorite Things, and it has a nice white inside so you can write your message. This card was much faster than the others to put together because I just did basic chevron stitches in the background, so they're just half stitches with an empty line in between, so it takes a lot less time. Now that butterfly is from the Poppy Stamps Stitched Butterfly Trio die set. I just die cut the butterfly from white cardstock and it adds a little bit of faux stitching detail. In the center, I die cut a heart and added this tiny little thinking of you sentiment from the Simon Says Stamp Happy Day stamp set. I like that this stamp set has lots of small messages that you can add to tiny areas. And the little antenna, I just cut really thin strips of cardstock for that and added them to the butterfly. Now this cardstock note card is a white shimmer cardstock from Carta, so it's kind of like that silver I've been showing you, but it's white. I really can't show the shimmer very well in the video, but it is a nice white cardstock with a touch of shimmer. This next card features like a box stitch, that's what I call it, in the center. Basically, I did back stitches in both directions, vertical and horizontal, to create that fun stitch pattern in the center. Around it, I just did basic cross stitches in different shades of pool thread. And that is all on a soft pool cardstock. Now for the sentiment, I die cut a heart from vellum using the Hero Arts Infinity Heart die set. I then white heat embossed the sentiment that says "You're a Blessing." This is from this fabulous new Paper Smooches Kindness Sampler stamp set. A lot of great messages in there. I then added a small little heart that I covered with some Wink of Stella shimmer and glossy accents for my own kind of DIY embellishment, and I glued that onto the stitched background. When I have a busy pattern like this one here, I find it best to do a white heat embossed sentiment on a piece of vellum. I feel like that doesn't hide too much of the pattern and keeps the focus on the background. So for this one, I did lots of different stitches and some different color combinations, and then did French knots to add the sequins. Now that vellum heart has a sentiment white heat embossed from this new Gina K Designs stamp set. The stamp set is in the summer kit and has some beautiful images that are great for layering, but I'm really loving the sentiments on it, and I think they look nice on vellum on top of these stitched backgrounds. Here's another card that I showed earlier. For this one, I created a frame of cross stitches, and then I just made little areas of different types of stitches in different colors. Once I filled in the whole area in the center, I did one long back stitch to separate each of the areas of patterns, just to give it a defined line between the patterns. Something different. It wasn't my favorite, but I might try it again with some added sequins or beads. Now the sentiment from this is from the Simon Says Stamp See You Soon stamp set. This is part of one of their recent card kits, but you can buy the stamp set separately, and I really like this set. That sentiment that says sending a summer hello works with a variety of cards. Now this is one of those cards where I covered the background with the cross stitch holes by cutting it twice, which I showed you earlier in this video. Now this one does take a lot longer, and you could even just create an element that you framed if you wanted to. But I really had fun mixing the blue and purple colored threads in a variety of stitches and sequins. And I even used some metallic silver thread on this one. Now for this sentiment, I decided to keep it very basic. So I die cut 2 vellum hearts, one that's slightly bigger than the other, from the Hero Arts Infinity Heart die set once again. Now that blessed word, that one I actually die cut 3 times and stacked it on top of each other, so it had some dimension to it. And it is from the Memory Box Blessed Perky script die. And by the way, there is one that says blessing too. They're sold separately. And then I also stacked a little heart underneath it, a little heart die cut. There is a matching stamp set for each of those Blessed and Blessing Perky script dies that I showed you. I decided not to use that, but I could have white heat embossed those words above or below the die cut on the vellum, but I wanted to keep this card very simple. And yes, that card did take some time, but I was on a girls' weekend on the lake and we had a good time, and I just did some stitching while we laughed. Okay, here's another one. This one's very simple. It was one of my earlier stitching projects. I did a rainbow of cross stitches on the background, and I skipped every other line to save some time. Now I want to show you a trick with that thanks so much message. This is a paper smooches die, and the thanks and so much are separate, but I wanted to show you how to perfectly position those separate little die cuts together. And I'm doing this on a vellum heart from Hero Arts. Okay, so this is the thanks so much die. I actually taped the dies together so they'd be perfectly positioned, and I'm going to die cut it from some black cardstock. You could put some adhesive tape on the back of this before you run it through, but I decided to use a glue pen instead. So after I've run this through, I'm going to use my negative space as a guide for positioning these perfectly onto my vellum heart. So I'm lining it right up on my heart so that the thanks and so much are exactly where I want them to be on the heart. And I'm just going to tape it onto my work surface. Now I'm going to put some adhesive on the back of the word thanks, and I'm using a quickie glue pen for this, but you can use whatever adhesive you find works best for you. Once it's covered with adhesive, I just pop it right into place into the opening on the negative space, and I hold it there until it dries. Now I'm going to do the same for each of the individual letters on so much. But instead this time, I'm just going to put the adhesive in the opening on the vellum and then pop the letters on it. I just found this was faster. So I'm going to put it right onto the vellum for the O, pop the letter in, and let that dry. So once all my letters are adhered into the openings, I can remove that negative space, and all of my words and letters are perfectly positioned and spaced evenly on that vellum heart, and that saves me a lot of time. I really like this sentiment and that you can use the thanks by itself or use the so much with it. Be sure to give it a lot of time before you try to remove that negative space so that the letters stay put on your vellum heart. And check out how cute that looks. So now I can put some adhesive on the back of that heart hidden behind each of the letters and then glue that right onto our stitching and putting something heavy on it so it has some time to dry and stay in contact with the stitches. This trick of using the negative space works for any card, not just for these stitched type of cards. Using this heart with the thanks so much is one of my favorite of the designs, so I plan to use it on any future stitch background cards that I create. Here's another beginner kind of stitched background that's very simple. I just did full cross stitches in a variety of colors and kind of created my own little pattern. Now for that sentiment, this is really easy to do. I die cut the word celebrate from a new My Favorite Things die. And I actually die cut 2 of them and I stacked them on top of each other so there was some dimension. I then covered it with some Wink of Stella shimmer pen so it was shiny. And then I put a couple coats of clear embossing powder on top of it. You just take your Versamark pen, squish it on the black die cut, add some clear embossing powder, heat set it, and repeat that a few times. And that gives it that beautiful domed kind of shine that you see on that Celebrate word die cut. Now I did a similar thing for this one. This background, I did some rainbow, and I left a few lines open. Once I was done, I went back and added sequins to those few open lines, and you can see the sequins with the French knots in there. This is a good one when you're trying to practice doing those French knots with the sequins. Now for the hugs on this one, I used one of my favorite dies. It's inexpensive. It gives you a lot of bang for your buck. It's the EcoPark alphabet die set. Now this die set is just one large die that cuts all the letters that you need. And I die cut the word hugs from white cardstock, and I did that 4 times, and I glued them all on top of each other. And when I was done, I had these white hugs letters on top of my card, and they kind of got washed out in the card. So I colored the top layer black and added some glossy accents to it, and that allowed it to stand out more against that colored background. You can use these alphabet dies to personalize your cards too. Now I also made a few teacher cards. I like to make teacher cards, and since these have a lot of time put into them, I thought they were perfect for teachers. On this one, I used the Sugar Pea Teacher die. I love this die because it cuts the word teacher and a little apple for the A. I used the Mama Elephant Sunday Sentiments to put underneath it. I think you're all sorts of wonderful. And I white heat embossed that on a strip of vellum. Now this stitch background, I actually kind of created a plaid look. Not sure I love it much, but I just kind of went to town with it and created stripes of color going in both directions, allowing them to overlap each other a bit. And I thought the colors were perfect for a teacher card. You can see there the white die cut with the apple that's red and green and brown. And I put some shimmer and glossy accents on it so it would stand out. That die is definitely one of my favorites and will be used for lots of teacher cards this year. Now, if you want to do stitching but save some time, you can just stitch some of the holes and leave the rest open. Here I did 2 back stitch frames, one in red and one in white thread, and then 1 cross stitch frame in white thread, and I left the rest of the dots open, and I think it looks really cool. Now I again used the Sugar Pea Teacher die and the Mama Elephant Sunday Sentiments, and my little apple is covered with red, green, and brown marker, a little bit of shimmer, and some glossy accents. Now this is the card that many people thought I was crazy about because I took the time to do this, but I enjoy doing it. So I die cut the entire background using the Paper Smooches die set, and I did kind of an ombre of blue cross stitches covering the entire background. Then I used a great new die from Sugar Pea. It's another one of my favorite teacher dies. This one I die cut the border, and then I colored all the little pieces that come in the die set and glued it on top. This is the Sugar Pea Schoolscape die set. It even has a road that you can do also, but I skipped that part. So I die cut that little border from some white cardstock. It's so intricate. And I die cut the little pieces, colored them all, glued them on top, and you get this beautiful, fun little school scene. And then I just used some double-sided tape to adhere that to the bottom. And then I stamped the sentiment from the Sugar Pea Sweet Sentiment Teacher stamp set. And there you have a card with lots of details to it. Yes, it did take some time, but I definitely feel like teachers are worth it. So be sure to check out those school teacher die cuts. I think they're great for making teacher cards. Now earlier I showed you a border die made of tiny little dots from Paper Smooches called the Dashes and Dots die set. I die cut that 3 times in a row here along the bottom of the card to create 3 rows of cross stitches in 3 shades of green. I wanted to add some flowers to that. So first I did my stamping, and I stamped thanks bunches from the Paper Smooches Kindness Sampler. I used that earlier too. But the flowers on there are actually cut from felt. This is how I like to incorporate felt to my cards. I die cut these from the Memory Box Plush Prairie flower set, glued them onto my card, and then I poked holes through all the little holes on the flowers. This allowed me to stitch them onto my card. So the adhesive I used earlier was really just temporary. It's really being held in place by my stitches. So I did stitching right through the felt onto my card, hid all my mess on the back of it, and then I used a French knot with a few sequins to add towards the center. I used basic stitches to create the little stems and leaves on this. And there's another way you can do stitching on your card. This one takes less time because there's only 3 rows of stitching along the bottom. Now I did felt flowers on this card too. Now that background was created again with the Paper Smooches cross stitch die. And then I added a bunch of different stitches in different colors and some sequins. But the embellishment on it I created with that same Memory Box Plush Prairie Flowers set Die cut it from some felt along with some leaves from this memory box die set. And I used stitching to add stitching to that and stitch it right onto my card. Then I added a little sentiment in the center from the Simon Says stamp Happy Days. So you can use felt embellishments to kind of embellish these stitched cards. It adds to that handmade feel. Or you can use any ready-made embellishments you may already have. I really like stitching with felt and with paper, so this card was a fun option to kind of pull the two together. Okay, so all these cards that I've showed you so far have used the paper smooches die to create the little holes for stitching. However, I wanted to show you that you can do it yourself by just using a needle or paper piercer, and it's not hard to do, and the results are really nice. All you need to do is poke your own holes, and what I did is I just used a ruler and a pencil to draw little guidelines. I wanted a square area in the center of my card where I could do some stitches and add some sequins. So I'm just using my T-ruler and a pencil to draw little guidelines. After I have my guidelines, I can start the piercing at all the intersections of the lines. So I've started those. Now I want to do little holes that are 1/4 inch apart. So if you watch, I'm just poking a little hole every 1/4 inch using my ruler as a guide. Now these aren't going to be perfectly positioned, but in the end it really doesn't matter, and you'll see that. But I'm going along each pencil line and poking a hole about every 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to continue to do this in both directions until I have that entire square filled with holes that are 1/4 inch apart, and it doesn't take that long at all. So I've first poked the holes all around the outside of my square. Now I'm just drawing the grid lines connecting each of the holes across from each other. And this basically creates a grid that is 1/4 inch apart. And then I can just poke a hole at each of the intersections. If you have graph paper, like the graph paper that we used in school when I was an engineer, you can buy it, it's cheap to buy. You can lay a piece of graph paper over your cardstock and just follow the graph paper grid and create holes that way too. That saves a lot of time, and it's very easy to do. Now that I have all of my holes done, I erase my lines, and I am just going ahead and doing some cross stitches using that pattern just like we did the stitches earlier. After I covered it with cross stitches, I went back and I added some cat scrapiness flower sequins with a French knot in the middle, and I just did that at each of the intersections of the X's. And check out that fun pattern, and I just used a needle to create those holes. Again, I used the Echo Park script alphabet just to die cut the word hi, and I die cut it from a few pieces of white cardstock and glued them together for dimension. I just trimmed down my panel and added that to a top folding white note card, and there we have a stitch background that I created on my own. Now before we go, I did want to show you that you can stamp a matching envelope using a variety of dies, but I liked using the little stitched heart from this waffle flower stitched cup of tea stamp set, and I put the heart right on the flap, and the stitching matches the stitching on the card quite nicely. It's a nice finishing touch to pull it all together. So there you have an incredibly long video showing the fun ways you can do stitching on a card. I had a lot of requests. Sorry, there's so much information in here. I hope you enjoyed it and you give this a try. It's a great way to stay busy while on the go. If you're interested in the products, I link them below, as always, in my YouTube description. But it's really helpful to go to my blog for this video because I have photos of all these cards so you can get a closer look at the colors and stitches that I used. Thanks so much for sticking with me. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon with a much shorter video.